They said the human mind was the one battlefield the Cold War could never reach. Yet in the winter of 1964, an operation surfaced that shouldn't have existed. An operation so strange that even the Pentagon refuses to acknowledge it today. Because hidden deep inside the archives of Fort Meade was a single memo stamped "Eyes Only." One sentence stood out. Subject demonstrated hostile remote influence without physical presence. A paradox. The United States claimed psychic warfare was impossible. So, why was the military documenting incidents suggesting it wasn't? This was the birth of something the world was never meant to see: Project Chimera. And everything that followed would challenge the limits of reality, duty, and survival. The shadowy genesis. It began with fear, the one thing the Cold War produced in unlimited supply. In 1963, CIA analysts intercepted fragments of Soviet correspondence mentioning a classified initiative codenamed Ostroye Zrenie, sharp vision. The implication was impossible: that the USSR was attempting to weaponize human consciousness itself. Washington dismissed it as disinformation until a defector claimed he'd witnessed something that changed everything. He described a Soviet test chamber, a blindfolded officer placing his hand on a sealed envelope, and without opening it, describing, in eerie detail, the classified photographs inside. The Pentagon laughed him out of the room. But 2 months later, a U.S. radar station in Turkey reported a breach. An encrypted message transmitted on a frequency no American equipment was using. The source? A Soviet intelligence officer who wasn't anywhere near Turkey. He was 600 miles away. The Pentagon couldn't explain it. And when things cannot be explained, they are classified. Within weeks, a new working group quietly assembled. Neuroscientists, intelligence officers, behavioral researchers, and 2 men who had their names scrubbed from military rosters. Their mission had no template, no doctrine, no precedent. If the Soviets were building psychic soldiers, America needed its own. Thus, Project Chimera was born, an experiment not in machinery, but in minds willing to be pushed beyond anything the military had ever attempted. But Chimera wasn't seeking anyone. The project had a list. Individuals flagged for anomalous perception. People whose childhoods were filled with strange events their families never explained. One case file describes a boy who correctly predicted a military helicopter crash a week before it happened. Another details a woman who finished the security codes an officer hadn't spoken out loud. Coincidence? Or something far more dangerous? The Chimera board didn't believe in coincidence, so they sent agents across the country, pulling these people from quiet towns, research labs, even suburban homes. They were told they were serving their country in a classified intelligence initiative. None of them were told the truth, because the truth would have made them run. The lab that shouldn't exist. Their destination was a compound in the Nevada desert so deep in blackout funding that even its construction records were erased. Part training facility, part psychological crucible, part interrogation chamber. Upon arrival, the recruits noticed one thing. There were no windows. Every hallway curved slightly, so no one ever knew where they really were. And deep underground, beneath layers of concrete and radiation shielding, sat the heart of Chimera, the isolation vault. The vault had one rule. Inside, the mind becomes the battlefield. Here, Recruits spent hours staring into darkness while scientists monitored their brain waves for anomalies the military refused to define. Some described hearing whispers from rooms that didn't exist. Others claimed they could sense the presence of people behind walls. A few said nothing at all. But their biometric readings told a different story. The strangest reactions came from a recruit codenamed Sentinel, a calm, quiet man with no military background. During one session, he described a Soviet general walking through a hallway with blue tiles. Hours later, US satellites confirmed the interior of the building he described, a building Sentinel had never seen. The Chimera board was stunned. But instead of celebrating, they asked one question. If he can see them, can they see him back? And in that moment, Project Chimera crossed a line it could never return from. Because someone, or something, was already watching. They thought the isolation vault was the hardest phase of Chimera. They were wrong. Because once the recruits proved they had the perception anomaly, the real training began. The training meant to turn them into silent weapons. The Pentagon called this stage cognitive field operations. The recruits called it something else. The unlearning, training the unseen weapon. The first lesson was simple. The mind can interfere with reality in ways we don't fully understand. The second was far more unsettling. The mind can also be interfered with. The instructors, men with blank name tags and emotionless voices, designed exercises that made no military sense. Recruits were told to sit alone in concrete rooms and identify the exact moment someone entered a building a mile away. Guesswork wasn't tolerated. Every session was cross-checked with surveillance footage. But accuracy wasn't the strange part. The strange part was how many times they were right. Sentinel, the quiet man from Part 1, developed an ability the researchers hadn't even theorized. He could detect emotional states through walls. Fracture, a former communications technician, could sense when someone lied with unsettling precision. Wraith, a woman who'd spent her life avoiding attention, demonstrated something the instructors feared. People forgot she was in the room. Even while looking at her, these weren't superpowers. They were unpredictable neurological anomalies forced into patterns the human brain was never built to control. And each time a recruit succeeded in an exercise, Chimera escalated the difficulty. The Black Room. Halfway through training, the recruits were introduced to a chamber they hadn't seen before, a door with a biometric lock, a warning label simply reading, "Restricted, FN clearance only." Inside was absolute darkness, except for a faint red halo from a single ceiling sensor. The instructors never called it by name, but among the recruits it was whispered as the Black Room. Here, the goal wasn't perception, it was projection. A recruit would sit alone, heart rate climbing, while scientists in another room displayed sealed images, files or coordinates on a monitor. The recruit had to describe them. Not guess, describe. At first, the results were scattered, fragments, impressions, vague shapes. But then came the incident that forced the Pentagon to triple the security. Sentinel, the program's strongest subject, interrupted a session, visibly shaken. He described a Soviet communications map. Not the one the researchers had shown him, a different one, a new one, a map that wasn't supposed to exist yet. Hours later, an intelligence intercept confirmed it. The Soviets had changed their encryption routes that morning. How did Sentinel know? The Chimera board dismissed the question. They were focused on something else. We can't let this leak. Any leak becomes a countermeasure. For the first time, The recruits understood the truth. If they were weapons, Chimera was terrified of them falling into the wrong hands. But there was another layer no one wanted to talk about, a phenomenon appearing in the Black Room sessions. Something the scientists labeled only as echo events. Heart monitors would spike. Temperature drops were recorded in locked rooms. Shadows appeared on thermal cameras where no one was standing. The recruits could feel it too. The sensation of being watched. Not physically, but mentally. Like something was reaching back. The instructors banned them from speaking about it, but secrecy didn't stop it. The echo events kept growing stronger. The incident at Grid 7. Training ended abruptly 3 months after it began. A blackout swept across the entire compound. A planned, stress drill, according to the staff. But the recruits knew something wasn't right. There were tremors underground. Doors locked themselves. And from the Black Room wing came a sound no one had ever heard before. A single, low-frequency hum. Not mechanical, not electrical. Something else. When the lights returned, Grid 7, the deepest wing of the facility, was sealed behind blast doors. Everyone inside, gone. Not deceased, not evacuated. Gone. Their names vanished from the Chimera roster, their files erased, their bunks emptied before the recruits even returned to their quarters. The instructors said nothing. The scientists avoided eye contact. And the Pentagon response team that arrived the next morning didn't ask questions. They issued one command. Training is over. Prepare for deployment. But deployment to where? And against what? None of the recruits knew. But Sentinel, pale, shaken, and silent, whispered one sentence before lights out. Whatever was in Grid 7, it wasn't human. The recruits believed they would be deployed overseas, a quiet insertion into Europe, a covert monitoring assignment, a Cold War chess move. But Chimera's first mission wasn't in Moscow, Berlin, or anywhere on the map. It was aimed at something far closer, a threat the Pentagon refused to name. And the recruits learned this the moment they stepped into the briefing chamber and saw the classified stamp across the screen. Domestic anomaly, priority red. The missions that never happened. The target location was a shuttered NSA relay station in the Appalachians, an outpost abandoned years earlier after a fire destroyed the generator bay. Only now the station had begun transmitting again. Not Morse, not voice traffic. Something different. A repeating signal, so strange the technicians assumed it was equipment malfunction. Until they saw the timestamp metadata. The signature embedded inside the transmission wasn't modern. It was identical to encryption markers last used in 1958, more than a decade earlier. And worse, the signal contained coordinates pointing to the basement of the Chimera compound. When the room fell silent, the director of operations said 3 words. This is a breach, but not a physical one, a cognitive one. Some intelligence channel, human or otherwise, had reached inside the Chimera network and identified the recruits by their code names. No one understood how, but everyone understood what had to be done. You're going to the relay station. You're going to find what's sending that signal. And you're going to shut it down. The recruits weren't soldiers. They weren't trained for combat. But none of that mattered. Chimera didn't need fighters. Chimera needed listeners. The relay. The facility stood at the edge of a frozen ridge, draped in fog thick enough to swallow sound. The power grid was offline. No lights, no hums, no signs of life. Yet the antenna array rotated in perfect silence, moving without any electricity. Wraith sensed it before the others. Something here is aware. The interior told another story. Dust layers decades thick, frozen pipes, collapsed drywall. A place untouched since the fire. But deeper inside, the temperature rose unnaturally. Warm air flowed up from the basement stairwell. The very place the coordinates pointed to. Fracture's pulse spiked. There's someone down there. He wasn't guessing. And Sentinel, the most gifted of them, stopped at the top step, refusing to move. He whispered, "It's not a person." The basement room, the basement door was half melted, as if exposed to extreme heat. Yet the rest of the room was intact. The source of warmth pulsed from a single device on a metal table. It wasn't NSA equipment. It was Chimera equipment. Old Chimera equipment, stamped with a logo the recruits had never seen before. A diagnostic console flickered to life when the team approached. The display wasn't running any software they recognized. It was running their session logs. Recordings from the Black Room, including ones the recruits had never been shown. But something wasn't right. The logs were incomplete, cut off, overwritten, as if someone else had accessed them from outside time. More disturbing were the reflection timestamps. Each psychic session showed a faint mirrored signal, a return ping, coming not from the recruits' minds, but to them. Fracture exhaled, trembling. It wasn't us reaching out. Something was reaching back. Then the console printed a single line of text. Grid 7, status, active. The recruits froze. Grid 7 had been sealed. The occupants vanished. The wing buried under reinforced concrete. But the system insisted. Grid 7 was functioning. Wraith stepped back. There's no power source here. How is any of this running? Before anyone could answer, the antenna array above them stopped rotating. The facility went silent. And then the lights flickered once, not with electricity, with movement. Shadows formed on the walls. Silhouettes of people standing behind the recruits, though the room was empty. The temperature crashed. Their breaths turned white. Sentinel fell to one knee, clutching his head, whispering through clenched teeth. They didn't disappear. Grid 7 didn't fail. Wraith steadied him. Then where are they? Sentinel's voice trembled. They're still connected. The escape. Nobody planned. The door behind them slammed shut. Bolts locked automatically. The console screen flashed bright red. A new message appeared. Reintegration phase commencing. No one knew what that meant, but all of them felt the same thing. A presence, rising from the darkness, growing stronger by the second. The recruits pushed against the door with everything they had, and on the third try, it gave way. They fled up the stairs as the basement filled with a low, vibrating hum. The same hum they heard the night Grid 7 was sealed. And as they reached the exit, Sentinel looked back only once. His expression was empty, drained, horrified. Because he realized something none of them wanted to admit. That wasn't a signal, it was a response. The Chimera recruits escaped the relay station, but no one spoke during the flight back. Not about the shadows, not about the console, not about the voices Sentinel insisted were still whispering at the edge of his thoughts. Because they all sensed the same thing. Whatever happened in that basement wasn't over. And the moment they reached the Nevada compound, the silence shattered. The collapse of Project Chimera. Armed personnel surrounded the runway. a level of security none of the recruits had ever seen. The instructors who once spoke in monotone were now wearing combat gear. Scientists moved frantically between buildings, carrying lockboxes and incineration canisters. Something had changed. The director of operations met the recruits personally. Another first. His face was gray, exhausted, almost frantic. "Grid 7 is activating," he said, without greeting. "And it's using your neural templates to do it." The recruits exchanged looks. Wraith stepped forward. "We're not connected to Grid 7. The director shook his head. "You don't understand. Chimera wasn't designed to build psychic soldiers. That was the cover. The real objective was containment." Fracture frowned. Containment of what? The director didn't answer. He simply pointed to the ground beneath their feet. The lab below. Deep under the compound, beneath levels the recruits didn't know existed, was another facility. Not a training wing, a vault. The air was cold, the lights dimmer than normal. Rows of sealed rooms lined the corridor, each with reinforced walls thicker than bunker steel. Each room held a single object: recording devices, metal plates, ceramic slates etched with symbols, even fragments of Soviet research tools. But the final room held something else. A chair. Restraints. A cracked set of biometric sensors. Sentinel froze. "I've seen this," he said quietly. "In my black room sessions." The director nodded. "You weren't imagining it. Those sessions weren't simulations. You were accessing imprints left by previous subjects." Wraith's voice tightened. "Previous?" The director exhaled. "Grid 7 housed the first generation. Recruits with uncontrolled perception anomalies. Their abilities weren't stable. They didn't respond to training. And when the program expanded, things began happening." The group knew what he meant. The echo events, but hearing it confirmed made their skin crawl. Fracture steadied himself. "What happened to them?" The director finally looked them in the eye. "They didn't die. They shifted." The truth about Grid 7. He led them into a secure observation chamber. On a massive screen was a live feed of Grid 7, the sealed wing buried in concrete. At first, the image looked like static. Then the static moved. Shapes flickered in and out of view. Almost human, almost recognizable, but distorted like reflections on moving water. The director pointed. "Those are the missing recruits. Their neural patterns still exist, but their physical forms are inconsistent." Sentinel whispered. "They're trapped." The director nodded. "And they are desperately trying to re-establish a host connection." The room went quiet. Chimera hadn't created soldiers. Chimera had created something else. A bridge. A pathway between stable minds and unstable ones. A pathway Grid 7 was now trying to reopen. The choice. A technician rushed in with a report. "Sir, the relay station is transmitting again. It's targeting the recruits' cognitive signatures. All of them." The director didn't hesitate. "We're destroying Grid 7. Wraith stepped forward. "If you do that, what happens to the people inside?" "Then they stay wherever they are," the director said. "The risk of reintegration is too high. If they anchor into you, your minds won't survive." The recruits exchanged glances. Fear, guilt, disbelief. But then Sentinel spoke. "They're reaching for us because we're the only ones who can hear them." The director's patience snapped. "Grid 7 is unstable consciousness with no physical anchor. If it binds to you, it won't bring those people back. It will overwrite you. The alarms began blaring, the vault started locking down, and somewhere in the depths of the compound a low hum rose. The same hum from the relay, from the basement, from the night grid 7 vanished. Sentinel pressed his hands to his head. They're here. They're trying to open the door. The director issued the final command. Seal the vault. Initiate purge. The end of Chimera. The purge sequence detonated shaped charges buried deep beneath the compound. A shock wave rippled through the foundation. Monitors went dark. The grid 7 feed dissolved into black. Silence, smoke, then nothing. Project Chimera was wiped from existence. Or so the Pentagon believed. Because months later, buried inside an unmarked intelligence annex, a technician reviewing abandoned Chimera drives found one corrupted file. A single audio fragment. A whisper layered with static. Connection incomplete. Searching for host. And according to internal timestamps, it had been recorded 3 days after Grid 7 was destroyed.